You've reached Hotel Pacifico, your 5-star destination for BC politicos. Press 4 for room service. Press the star key for your hosts Mike McDonald and Kate Hammer.
Welcome back, guests. We are enjoying a bit of, I think, snowy flurries today at a time that feels like the deep winter of the 5th session of the 42nd Parliament. Does that feel right, Mike? We're sort of in that ending.
Getting ready. Getting ready for spring thaw before the election.
I mean, calm before the storm, if we want to work with weather metaphors here. Something like that. And kind of a perfect guest today, too, because I know a Hotel Pacifico guest, you spend all your time. Apparently, you can't get enough of the political news. But we have a guest today who's going to help us understand a bit of where and how the public might be turning their attention to some of what's going on in politics more squarely. He's a former senior producer at CBC, host and associate producer at Omni, producer behind Hockey Night in Canada, Punjabi edition, and currently the news director and station manager at Global BC. Welcome to Hotel Pacifico, Bhupinder Hundal.
Thanks for having me. Pleasure to be here. Excited for our conversation coming up here.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, so one thing I want to do, because I think, Bhupinder, you should know our listeners, we call them politicos. They tend to be the folks who kind of can't get enough political news. They always want to go a layer deeper. They always want to hear a bit of the behind the scenes story and the strategy. And I was wondering if you could give us all a bit of perspective on how normal are we? Like when we're talking about the broader population and your viewers at Global, what's their appetite like for political news, and what types of stories, really land for them?
Look, I think, politicals on regardless of which political party you're with, I mean, you're all trying to understand where the population is, what are the issues that they're struggling with, what are the needs that they have, which is no different than what we have to do on a day in and day out basis as well. And I think, we try to keep it as simple as possible. Like, try to understand what is it that people are going through, what are the challenges that they face, and try to give voice to some of those challenges and try to impact some positive change. I think ultimately anybody who does journalism is always wanting to do it for the idea of creating positive change. And I think, our strategy is really to root ourselves in our communities, to really be the voice of people who are either struggling or having difficulties navigating systems, structures, situations, and because there's one example that might impact many others who are going through the same thing. So I think from a political perspective, I think political parties are always trying to figure that out and what that is and try to find solutions to those things. And I think what we're doing on our end as journalists is to really look at what those issues are, and try to hold political folks to account on some of those things. And that's why we have this wonderful yet conflicting relationship, I would say, between journalists and politicians. That's why it exists.
Yeah. Well, I wonder then, like, when you're kind of figuring out, what are the top stories, for the day, and you're looking at some of the stories. I mean, what I'm hearing from you too is there's a reflection in politics and in journalism here where I think people just are feeling really pinched. People are feeling like, the math on their paychecks just not adding up. The budget they go to the grocery store just doesn't go as far. They go to the grocery store with just doesn't go as far. So I guess when you're kind of thinking of coverage and sort of what people are going to react to and relate to, is that sort of a bigger theme for you right now and what you're covering?
Yeah, I mean, affordability is a huge thing right now for everyone. I think across the political spectrum, regardless of where you fall, whether you live in different geographic parts of this province, or whether you're well off or whether you're struggling to make ends meet, everybody's feeling the pinch of affordability right now. And I think, when we think about the stories that we want to cover and what issues that we want to tackle, we do want to think about what is impacting people the most right now. and ensuring that we are talking and bringing those issues up, and ensuring that we're answering the questions that many people have. And their issues are basically centered on day to day. I don't think the average person out there is, we get excited about being in the nitty-gritty and the grind of what happens politically. I'm pretty sure people who are in the political process are involved in that too. But I think, from the broader perspective, most people are just trying to figure out how to get by day to day. How are they going to get to where they need to go? How are they going to be able to make ends meet at the end of the day? How are they going to provide, the best opportunity they have for themselves and for their families and for their kids? And I think, we just need to, from our perspective, we just want to make sure that we're understanding what that is. And one of the things that, I really try to say to our folks is we also have a little bit of privilege on our end too, right? And what we want to do is always seek out, a perspective or a lens that we're not familiar with, to try to understand what it is that different people from, regardless of where they're coming from, what they're experiencing, what they're going through, why they feel the way they do, what are the pressure points that they're facing, and the better understanding that we can have of what those things are, the better we can be in our coverage. And, I think that's an important pillar for us as we move forward, that, hey, let's try to spend an extra effort to seek out a perspective that is outside of our own, to have a better understanding of who's out there, what they're facing, what their issues are, and the perspective that they're coming to it from. I think it's really important that we kind of figure out what that is.
So you're pushing content out morning, noon, and night through your various newscasts, plus BC One continues to, be, I guess, increasingly become a presence on news delivery. So let's take a look inside the sausage factory. I'm curious to know what your day looks like. Like, how do these stories shape up during the day? Like, you're obviously starting in the morning in terms of the 6 o'clock newscast and setting your priorities, but can you give us a window into the decision-making process and what makes the cut as a story and how you allocate your resources?
Yes, there's only a finite number of resources, and that's always going to be the case. Look, we have, as you said, morning news, night, weekends, and not even just on TV. We've got BC One. We've got our online, platform. We've got CKNW Radio. That's part of the global news ecosystem as well. There's a lot of different platforms that we need to service on a day in and day out basis because that's where people are. For us, I have to say, we have a great team here at Global BC, people with incredible experience, from our reporters to our camera folks, to our editors, to our news assignment folks, our producers, our anchors. And because of that talented group, we have the ability to have a system here that really allows all of these things to come and bubble up. Our news assignment desk is really great at making sure that they have the communication. I would call that the central nervous system of the news operation. It's a group of people that are on the middle of the desk or in the middle of the brain of the newsroom that are trying to understand, okay, what are the big stories? Where are things going? Some of them are coming from reporters. Some of them are coming from information that someone has heard. There's tips that are coming in from the public as well. So how do we, get all these little different places where things are coming from and bring it into one hub? So we have a hub that is able to parse information from all these different places. We kind of bring it together, assess kind of where things are going and where we're at on a story that we have been covering, and what are some new things that are coming up, and what are things that are coming up that we need to start paying attention to. That's part of the conversation that we start to have. And once we assess what our priorities are about, like, here are the 8, 9, 10 stories that we're looking at, then we start looking at, okay, where's it going to go? Who can work on what? What kind of pairing do we want to have between reporters and camera people and producers, and how editors are going to fit into that, and where does radio and online fit into that? So we have conversations throughout the day that really culminate in all of these different teams getting involved in the process. And then we have, targets to hit, right? So For radio, it's every hour, at the top of the hour and at the bottom of the hour. For BC One, it's pretty much ongoing all the time. Then we have the noon show, the noon newscast with Colleen Christie, and then there's the early news with Sophie, and then there's the news hour where we put in all of our energy and focus on, and then it continues on where our evening team with Jordan Armstrong leading the charge at Global News at 11, picking up the ball from there and just moving stories forward. And then it picks up in the morning when Jason and Sonia come in the morning, and they're picking up the ball from what happened.
I'm exhausted
then,
just
then,
listening to this.
Yeah, and then you know, they have a little different component that they bring into it, where they have more longer form interviews, you know, short little updates of what's happened the day before, but new information that's coming on. So they'll pick out the topics that are either coming up that day or things that have made news the previous day, and bring in guests who can elaborate and talk about that. And then we're just continuing to build 24/7, one show after another on different platforms of how we continue to move the ball forward on a day-to-day basis. So it's a lot of great people and a lot of great teams and a lot of communication. I would say in the communication business, we always try to communicate, and we can never communicate enough. We got to keep trying to communicate even more.
Yeah.
But it's a 24/7 hamster wheel, I tell you.
So in that process, are you hands off, hands on? Like how involved are you in that kind of editorial process leading to the 6 o'clock newscast, for instance?
So I think, you know, it not only in my role here, but in the previous roles I've had, it's always been different. And I think, you know, at Global BC, I don't necessarily need to be involved in the minutia or the nitty gritty of what happens on a minute by minute, hour by hour, day by day basis. You know, part of that is, you know, I've, you know, studied a lot of leadership as well, is when you have great people and great skill and great minds, you got to let them flourish. And sometimes it's about getting involved when you need to get involved, but sometimes it's also allowing them to go out and do what they do best. Well, and that is that's always a juggling thing. Sometimes there are times where I feel like, yeah, I do need to jump in, and I want to get involved. And part of me says I want to get involved, but sometimes it's best to let your team thrive. And we have such talented people. You know, we want to ensure that our people are able to do what they do best, because I always say to our teams, like, no one person knows everything, and to make that assumption that you are the person that knows everything, and you know, that also leads to more mistakes. I think you really need to lean in on, you know, the elements and the strengths that you bring to the table. And I have very unique and specific strengths and perspectives that I bring to the table. And when it's needed and required, I'm in there. But there's also different strengths and skill sets that so many of our team members have. You know, that you want them to really, really flourish. And that's the great mix that we have here. We have such talented people, allow them to do the best work that they possibly can.
So I think you and I are reading some of the same leadership strategy documents, because I completely subscribe actually to that in general, managers tend to be prone to over-involve and get too involved in the detail than too outside. And that approach gets challenged more and more when you're working within the context of being asked to do more with less, which is certainly the trend line with within newsrooms everywhere. I'm wondering if you can give us a bit of a sense of scale, like when you're talking about all the folks, the producers, the reporters, the camera folks, like how many people are we talking about that you're sort of deploying in different capacities to collect news? And then how are you making the calls when that one story that maybe is going to take way more time, way more resources, you got to free up that person who has 10 other things they can do, but we know they're the person to chase the story. How within that pool of bodies you're working with, do you make that call?
Yeah. So I'll take a bigger picture view on it, then I'll zero in on a little bit of the minutia. You know, one of the things that, you know, obviously with the state of the industry, we are, you know, everyone is kind of struggling with trying to do great journalism, but, you know, with limited resources or even shrinking resources. And one of the things that, you know, I had particularly put a lot of focus on and emphasis on coming into it was taking a look at where are we? How are we structured? Does our structure allow us the opportunity to do the kind of journalism that the public wants us to do? And the kind of journalism that the public wants us to do is to do that kind of journalism that does involve time, that does go past just the surface level, that does have a little bit of an investigative element to it. And in order to do that, it's becoming more challenging because the resources are shrinking. So one of the things that I've kind of come to accept is that we're not going to get more resources. And how do we create a system and a structure that allows us to be able to be more flexible and fluid, that opens up the opportunity for somebody like a Ramina Dea or some of our other reporters to get more time, to be able to to spend the time to bubble up stories that are of significant public interest, but are not the things that you're going to be able to turn around when you get a story 10 o'clock in the morning, and then you got to put it on the air at 6 o'clock for the news hour. This, I think, is a real important pillar for us moving forward. We're trying to figure out every opportunity that we can in a challenging environment to continue to do that, because I think that's what the public really wants from us, and that's what they expect from us.
Can we pause there? Can we pause there?
Yes.
Because I love that you say that, because I think there's this instinct that like the public wants quick stuff. They want shallow stuff. Their attention span is short. Like, are you seeing something different? Are you seeing that they want the deeper dives, the more thoughtful analysis?
Yeah. So this is, this has been part of the struggle within journalism in general, right? Like when Twitter comes around or social media comes around, well, we have to do this or we have to do that, and we gotta get this audience over here, and we gotta do this kind of thing. My philosophy here, at the end of the day, regardless of which platform it is, regardless of where it's going to land or who's going to consume it, the one thing that always has to be there each and every time is that we have done our due diligence, we've done in-depth reporting, we've sourced our material properly, we have done great journalism. And because we've done great journalism that is centered around people, their stories, their issues, with the professionalism that people expect from journalists to be thoughtful, to understand the various perspectives, to relay what those various perspectives are on an issue so that the public has a better understanding of what those issues are, and understand from a variety of perspectives, whether they agree or not, what those issues are and where people stand and why they stand where they stand. I think that's a real important key element for us. And the delivery platforms may change, but the core concepts of how we do great journalism, we need to double down on that. And I think, in the media landscape, what has taken place is that we have been chasing after the squirrel running over here and the squirrel running over there. And, that's where you've gotten this fragmentation take place, right? Like when I look at the media landscape of the United States, it's like, MSNBC is over here and Fox News is over here. And then you've got a whole bunch of offshoots, and they've just said, well, that's our audience. That's our 30%. That's the only thing we're going to care about. That's the only view we're going to care about. That's the only one we're going to cater to. And that's what they push.
What do you, I mean, I know I've read somewhere that when you were younger, growing up in Port Alberni, you developed a habit, or at least an observation, about Tony Parsons on BCTV News, and, followed the news. And similarly with me, growing up in BC, BCTV, then Global, has kind of always been the dominant force in TV news. What do you attribute to the secret sauce there, or the maybe not so secret sauce, of why Global has continued its dominance in the ratings for all these years, and through a variety of different personalities and different approaches, I'm sure, but it's always been like BCers have formed a habit. And I'm just wondering what you think is behind that.
Yeah, I think it's obviously, there's a multitude of factors that go into it. One is the establishment of a local news hour program, the first of its kind anywhere in North America. And that was here at BCTV. And when you put your footprint down and you develop a following amongst an entire population that covered the entire province, there's been a long legacy and a deep-seated connection that has been built by the people who worked here, by the audience who has connected with a station that is so embedded locally with its people, not just on a superficial level, but on a deep emotional level, right? There's a deep-seated connection that it's a part of who we are and a part of our community. And I think for us moving forward, that is really important to us. We want to ensure that we, as Global BC, are representing the province, and we are the connective tissue for the province. That when things happen, when people think about, okay, where do I need to go to find out what's going on? It's automatically Global BC, or it's, BC TV, Global BC. Like, we want to ensure that tradition that has been built by so many, that we carry that forward, and not just carry it forward to maintain it, but nurture it and grow it and evolve it and take it to new places. There's people out there, demographics are changing, our society is changing, systems are changing, and we want to be on the forefront of that. We want to be a part of ensuring that we are reflective of BC from a demographic perspective, from a geographic perspective. We want to ensure that we're trying to strive to do that, and how do we get better each and every time. The ratings dominance that has continued has been amazing. It's a rare thing to see anywhere in the media landscape or in North America. And we're so privileged and blessed to be in that position. And I think because of that, there's a greater responsibility on us to continue to lead the charge and not rest on being like, hey, we're number one, everything's great for us. And we are in a privileged space versus, some of the struggles that many in the industry are facing right now. But I think our responsibility is, how do we continue to get better? How do we continue to connect with more people? How do we develop more meaningful relationships with many more communities? That is really important to us, that despite our success, that we continue to strive to do even better. And that's really important to us moving forward, that, if we can keep our focus squarely on that, I think we can, ensure that not only are we honoring the legacy of this place that has been built by the Tony Parsons and the Deborah Hopes and all of the great journalists who have been here, who have created this amazing foundation, but we can continue to grow it with the incredible new people that we have coming in, and the incredible people that we have at the helm right now with, Chris and Sophie leading the charge. So, I'm optimistic, despite all of the doom and gloom around the journalism industry. I always come into it with, there's always opportunity to be found. And if we could just, keep our focus on where that opportunity is and try to nurture and develop that and continue to work on that, those are things that we can control. There are certain aspects of things that we can't control. And that's okay. And some of those things are going to negatively impact us. But I think for us, we always want to concentrate on what is that we're doing, how can we do it better, and just work on and improving the things that we can control.
I just want to pick up, if I could just pick up a follow-up here on your comment about changing demographics and kind of adapting to that. And I know that you had a background with Omni, and working and delivering news to specific audiences like Chinese community and South Asian community. And I'm interested to know how you see that evolving, whether as we become more diversified here in the Lower Mainland, particularly, whether you see some communities needing that in-language news source, or how does that work relative to what you're doing at Global Now, where there's this more broader kind of unifying news delivery where you're trying to bring everyone along, like as someone who's been in politics and PR, I'm always thinking about like, what's the best way to communicate with communities that have different needs and different language capacities and that type of thing. So I'm just curious where you think it's at today in terms of how that ecosystem's working together.
Yeah. When we talk about why diversity within media, or the different media outlets that we have, why that ecosystem is so important as a whole, I think this example right here is the key reason as to why that needs to exist. you do, like, some of the stories that would be covered, and I have a lot of experience in this, working in a newsroom that is really, focused in and zeroed in on issues and things that are happening within a particular community. And there are several nuances and differences that do take place, and several stories that are big stories in those communities may not necessarily rise to the level that Global BC needs to cover it. But there actually is some of those stories that are big stories in those communities that should rise to being covered on Global BC. And I think, both of those things need to exist. So I think it's important for us to have a healthy ecosystem where communities are getting information on big ticket issues and getting a better understanding of that. But there are particular issues, centered around things that are very important to them. Like, the topic of immigration, for example, is one topic that we would cover significantly heavily when I was at Omni, where at Global BC, perhaps not as much. There's different reasons as to why we should be covering immigration issues at Global BC as well, but would we cover it to the extent that we do if I was at Omni? Probably not. But those stories and those issues are critically important in the ecosystem of that community. And some of those issues are real, and they're impacting families on a day-to-day basis. It's having real impact into the day-to-day lives that they're trying to live, especially when you're talking about family reunification or immigration fraud or exploitation or so on and so forth. Those are major issues that are taking place. So you do need to have a media entity or an organization that is zeroing in and focusing on those types of issues. And a responsibility on our part is to open our eyes from a mainstream media perspective to be like, we actually need to start paying attention to some of these things. And when they do rise, we're probably not going to do it to the extent that they are over here. But we do need to start covering some of these stories, because these are things that are happening in our communities that perhaps not everybody is knowing what's happening or understanding, but it's our responsibility to say, hey, this is actually happening in our backyard. We actually need to pay attention to these things. And I think the broader public needs to know about what those are.
Well, and there's that other layer, you just named it too, is it, do we cover it? And then how do we cover it? What voices, what do we illuminate in the issue? Picking immigration, right? Like it's, you talked about family reunification, right? And then often it can be discussed more as just economic policy and the holes in the labor market, right? So there's a lot, I think, that you can bring, not just to whether or not to cover something, but like how you cover it and what voices you contact in it, you elevate in it.
100%.
I want to throw something to you, Bhupinder, about politics. We've talked a lot about on this show. And it's the fact that the front lines of politics have actually changed a lot more quickly than sort of the back rooms, sort of the staffers and the support networks and the party infrastructure. And my observation of media would be there's a similar dynamic where in the front lines, the reporters maybe have changed a bit. And then sort of the most senior ranks of a lot of news organizations are maybe a bit slower to reflecting that diversity. And it occurs to me, as you were sort of describing some of what your role is and some of the decisions you're making, it is exactly that kind of senior ranking kind of place where a lot of the decisions about where to deploy resources, what topics to kind of drill down on, are being made. And bringing it kind of back to recent news, I'm thinking of the murder of Hardeep Nijjar and sort of what it would look like if an all-white, executive were sort of making the call on how to cover that, what topics to pull out of that, versus a group that's more diverse and more reflective of BC, and sort of what issues might elevate, in something and such a critical, important topic that has so many aspects to it. I'm wondering, from your perspective, as you've kind of seen, and you're there, I think, at a newsroom that is leading the way in some of that more senior diversification. But do you get to see that change manifests in real change in terms of what you cover and how you cover it?
Yeah, and I think it's, one of the things that, again, going back to kind of the earlier point I was making, taking an active look at systems and structures and how do we support better. And I think one of the important things for us was to kind of do a couple of things. One, to start actually doing stakeholder engagements, and talking to various community groups and getting a diverse round of voices within those community groups to kind of talk about journalism and how they feel about stories and what they're seeing and how they're reflected and what's resonating with them and what's not resonating with them and why they have trust issues, for example, with media and why, like, so I think we've gone through a significant exercise over the last, 2 to 3 years to really delve into and have those conversations. And part of that is not only engaging some external folks, but it gives an opportunity to engage your internal team, who probably doesn't have that lens to be exposed to that kind of a conversation and to be a part of a conversation that they ordinarily would not be a part of. That is part of the internal exercise that we're working on, so that you're not just being told or dictated, you're actually part of a conversation where you're trying to understand and hear from real people as to what they think, what they feel, why they feel the way they do. Some of it we'll agree with and some of it we won't, but to be part of that process and to be engaged in it, I think does wonders in terms of expanding one's knowledge about what they need to look out for. And sometimes the light bulb goes on in a situation organically where people, will come to a story and somebody be like, wait a minute, I heard about this in a conversation that we had in this old editorial board over here. I think we should do it a little bit differently. And when you see things like that happen, that's where you start seeing the kind of change, and you see the conversation within the room start to change based on the feedback and the work that we're doing in stakeholder engagement externally. So I think, when you start to see that kind of thing, I think that's really important. And, one of the things about, developing the leaders of tomorrow, like we really do want to do that here and develop the future leaders that are going to come and pick up the mantle and make things even greater and better. Obviously, I am concerned about it, as I'm sure people are in the political ranks, of being able to recruit and retain and help develop and nurture and create the leaders of tomorrow. And for journalists, that is becoming increasingly problematic, not just because of the state of the industry, but also another component that we have seen is the toxicity that it now exists is really impacting people's decisions. And the decision really is coming down to, do I really want to put myself through this? And is that payoff really worth it in the end? To deal with, people yelling at you, people screaming at you, people spitting on you, people yelling obscenities, threatening you. Do you really want to endure that kind of thing? And we have seen that is impacting, the future journalists of tomorrow, potentially wanting to pursue the career, but then walking away. Or people within the business now thinking about walking away because it's adding to the mental anguish and the stress of having to deal with it. So, I think we have a lot of these similar issues that we're facing. And I would say, as much as we want to diversify not only our newsrooms and make them better because they create new opportunities for us to engage with new audience and new people who perhaps are not engaged with us. And I love the opportunity to do that and build that out more. We are facing significant challenges. And I do think, overarchingly, we do have to probably start paying more attention and start having conversations about civility. Because that is really creating an issue, not just in journalism, not just in politics, but we've seen that happen in the healthcare sector, and we've seen that happen in other parts of our society. So it's really having a significant impact on developing the future leaders of tomorrow.
Well
I'm not
said.
sure civility is the right jumping off point here to talk about the provincial election. We have a planned provincial election in October. So obviously those are big moments for news organizations. I'm just curious how plans are shaping up at Global for how you plan to approach the election, and perhaps how you would use BC One in delivering news to the political junkies of British Columbia, and how you see that lining up, what the cadence of it is leading into the fall.
Well, one of the things, we've kind of been anticipation. So I would say in a nutshell, yes, we are working on and talking about the provincial election coming up in October. Some of the things that we have been working on, just even going back here is creating BC One as a home of breaking news and politics. And we have Focus BC where we're doing more longer form interviews. Richard Zussman and Keith Baldry are both doing a fantastic job over in Victoria. We're going to be wrapping up our political coverage. You've seen us air live question period from the legislature, just so people in BC get a sense of what is happening in the
BC One.
legislature on BC One. That hadn't been happening, as going back a couple of years ago. That wasn't the case, and that's something that we've added on. I think it's important for us, and we're not just doing question period just for theater, even though some people would like to believe that that's what we're doing it for. I think the real reason as to why we want to do that is we want people in BC to have easier access to what is happening, and how the issues are being discussed in the legislature. And we want them to see what the questions are being asked and what the answers are, and allow them to be able to be informed of how they view it, or what they like or what they don't like, and what they agree with and what they don't agree with. I think we want to create more access and more dialogue points for the public. And that was the motivation behind doing that. But I think politics is really, really important. The decisions that are being made, be it at a provincial level, a municipal level, or a federal level, do impact our daily lives. And I think it's better that we are informing people as much as we possibly can, and in my preference, in a more thoughtful manner, the better off we'll all be. And so that's where my goal is. And I think our team really wants to ramp up the dialogue and conversation around big issues in the province, especially when it comes to key ridings and key areas that are going to be battlegrounds, moving forward here in the provincial election. So these next several months are going to be quite interesting. I personally am looking forward to it. I love politics. Probably not, into it as much as I normally would like to be, from a journalist perspective, but we have great people and great reporters and great teams who are all going to be making sure that they're going to be bothering some of the politicians and political operatives out there.
I want to tap into your hockey broadcasting background. Are you forecasting a bench clearing brawl during the provincial election, or maybe or is it looking like a 4-game sweep for the NDP? I don't know. Is there any analogies that are forming in your mind?
Well, hey, the safest hockey bet you can make is if there's a playoff series, it's probably going to go 6 games.
There we go.
Okay, there you go. There you go.
It could be more competitive than we think.
More competitive than we think. 3-1, 3-2, 4-2. It could be, 2-2, 3-2, 4-2, or it could go game 7. So if that was one
hope for the opposition yet.
Yeah. If there's one way to play it completely middle of the road in a hockey sense, a playoff series going 6 games is exactly that.
Okay.
Bhupinder, thanks so much for joining us. I want to just make a shout out, like anyone working near or around you who can hold your coat or free a space in your calendar in some small way so you can spend more time mentoring and having coffees with the young journalists we know need to stay in the business and who need to be, to climb the ranks and diversify the business. If I can hold your coat and make that possible, I'll do it. But I just think it's fantastic to talk with you. I think your energy and your vision is fantastic. And I thanks for stopping by Hotel Pacifico. Nearly half of all women in Canada will experience an incident of gender-based violence, which means if you think you don't know anyone who's been impacted, you're wrong. Because gender-based violence takes place in Canada every day. In BC, according to the Moose Hide campaign, there are over 60,000 physical and sexual assaults against women every year, and that's more than 1,000 per week. A cornerstone of the Moose Hide campaign is the Moose Hide pin, a symbol of medicine which can be worn as a commitment to honor, respect, and protect the women and children in your life. To date, the organization has gifted over 5 million Moose Hide pins to Canadians. According to their estimate, each pin sparks 5 conversations about the issue and the movement, meaning over 25 million conversations have taken place that will help to support the end of gender-based violence. The campaign chose Moose Hide because it connects us all to the land, culture, and to each other. The Moose Hide pins are considered as small pieces of land medicine and a gift to any and all Canadians who are called to help create a country safe for all women and children and those along the gender continuum. Moose nourish their bodies by eating leaves, bark, and twigs from trees and shrubs on the land. They breathe fresh air and drink from clear streams. Each May, the Moosehide campaign team hosts the annual Walk to End Violence in Victoria, BC, which includes the opportunity to fast, learn, and support the campaign both in person and virtually. This year's campaign day is May 16th. As part of TELUS's commitment to reconciliation and in direct response to the 231 calls for justice, TELUS is amplifying the Moosehide campaign movement wherever possible. We'll talk more next week about TELUS's commitment to reconciliation and to the Moosehide campaign, but for now, please consider how you can contribute to ending gender-based violence. There are opportunities for individuals, families, and organizations to get involved. Visit the moosehidecampaign.ca website to learn more.
Hello. You've reached the Hotel Pacifico Strategy Suite.
Welcome back, Geoff. Good to see you.
Good to see you.
Back from Victoria. I think
I'm
you
here
know-
too, by the way. Don't forget about
Oh,
me.
but yes, it's just good to see you. Adequate to see you. I've already seen you.
Adequate to see
Old
me,
news.
thank you.
Adequate to see you. Glad
acknowledge
you're all
you.
here.
I'm really glad to
Acknowledge
see
your
you too, Mike.
existence. Wow, Geoff, stop trying to play the favorite. All right. Let's do a little bit more. Let's spend some more time on budget, because I do think since we spoke last week, there's just been a little bit more reaction from stakeholders, from the opposition. I think Todd Stone, was pretty pithy when he called the budget total crap. Mike, would you agree with that assessment, or is that a little bit harsh?
Well, I understand why the opposition would say that. That's for sure. Well, how's this budget going to age, I guess, is the question I have. And I don't think people are rioting in the streets since last Thursday. But I question whether there may be a growing unease over the, just the, I don't know, non-action on just grappling with some of the problems. Now, when I say that, I mean, it's just, obviously we've got $8 billion in deficit, and we talked about it in our little emergency episode on Thursday, that there are choices. You can restrain spending, you can raise taxes, or you can borrow. And Minister Conroy is pretty straightforward. That's the path they're going to take in order to ease spending concerns and not, raise taxes other than the scheduled carbon tax increase, which Geoff will jump in and momentarily and say that it was revenue neutral. But where's the, where's the there in all this? Like, what's the story for the voters? And I think if they're just hearing deficit and debt and not a lot of the good stuff, then, I think it just, it eats away a little bit. I don't think it's a thunderstruck moment or anything like that, but I just wonder whether it's contributes to just kind of a diminishment of enthusiasm for the government.
Yeah. Well, over to you, Geoff. I'm thinking this does, I'm going to say we are in a moment of, the budget feeling, there's just not a lot of love for this budget right now. And the government's getting a bit of grumbling. I don't think there's any way to argue that. But I wonder from your perspective, if there's a little bit, well, that was already decided, given the fiscal context, given the room that there was, and how that compares to emerging needs and priorities, that was always going to be this. And the best the government can hope for is that it's a contained period of time that doesn't really stick with anybody and they move on. Does that sound... or do you want to just give me a defense? Yeah.
Well, I think Todd Stone's comment, I stand to be corrected though, was he said it was total crap for the government to claim that it forgot or missed a deadline to put in the Kamloops Cancer Center.
Yes.
I'm sure he would say the whole budget was total crap, but there must have been a lot of rueful expressions, inside the government, because this has been a real bone of contention in Kamloops ever since the former Premier John Horgan promised
1991, actually.
Yeah, goes back
a long way.
far. So I think there's a cancer center clock in Kamloops that ticks away the time since the commitment was made and so on. And Adrian Dix has very recently been up there trying to underline that business cases in place and planning so we had procurement soon or something. I'm not sure exact timing, but it wasn't in this critical list that's in the budget that shows all the projects over 50 million. And that and the Olympic Village School, which will be unknown to the vast majority of people, it's not far from where I live, but was a second commitment made that was kind of high profile politically that was not listed. And in the budget lockup, Minister Conroy said, don't worry, there'll be good news for those folks. It just shows that people do want a lot of capital spending, and a lot of debt that's down the road in this budget is huge investments in infrastructure right off the charts for things that people will like cancer centers, hospitals, and so forth, billions and billions of dollars worth of it. So that's one side of it. But I think the government passed an important test yesterday or the day before, when the first bond rating agency said, we're not going to downgrade you.
Yeah.
There was a lot of chatter in some
But
of the places.
they did say, Geoff, they're not going to grade you largely due to your history of good fiscal management. Hats off to sits on large buckets of cash, Mike.
Hats
McDonald.
off to the Mike McDonald government. Thank you, Glenn
Yeah,
Clark.
that would be your government.
That was my government.
Mike,
yeah.
that always put the bond traders ahead of the people of BC. But anyway,
There we go.
the question is will that continue for the next three bond rating things?
Yes,
I think
exactly.
if one of them decides to go the other way and stop looking at the larger context, that'll be problematic for the government, because it'll turn into a validation of what has been Kevin Falcon's key point, that it's reckless spending. But I noticed today in question period, first question since the budget is, why isn't there more $10 a day daycare? And of course, the government side is going, well, you never wanted daycare. So we're delighted to hear you're concerned about it.
Yeah.
So this is going to be, I think the government's got a tough situation in this respect. It's being slammed for spending too much, and now we'll hear how little is being spent in so many areas, given how much is being spent. And that'll be the debate until something comes along to change the channel, I think.
Well, speaking of debates emerging from the budget, I think the other one that's turned into a bit of a debate is the flipping tax. And I think this is sort of turned into a debate in the fact that there's a lot of folks saying, like, yeah, this would have been great like 20 years ago, 10 years ago, not really as pertinent in a slower market like we're in now. And then some other folks, and I think I have to say credit to the Premier's kind of when he was explaining the flipping tax and gave that great soundbite about the example of the family purchasing and then being outbid by 5 developers. I think there is some folks kind of just saying, well, standing behind it, saying it's not going to hurt, and we are in a position where we need to explore even those types of options. I'll go back to you, Mike. Like, what do you think? What do you think the public's getting out of this? Like, is this something that they're going to take away as, okay, the EB government's really serious on housing affordability, or is it going to be an example of them rushing or flubbing a policy?
I think the government's created a lot of activity on the housing front. Certainly, Minister Kahlon's been out there a lot, and I think this is just yet another tool in the toolkit where they can say that they're trying to do something to make housing more affordable for people. Now, the question is whether that activity is enough politically, or whether the public's actually just going to want to see real affordability relief. It's a pretty tough position for government to be in, because a lot of external forces are driving that. But I think they can make a political argument that they've put it at the center of their agenda. Now, with regard to the flipping tax, my understanding of it is that, on your principal residence, if you buy a house, if you sell it within 2 years, I believe it is, Geoff, then you may be subject to a tax. And there's some exceptions and, circumstances where you don't have to pay it. But that's one of the kind of thin edge of the wedge on one's, capital gains exemption that they have on their principal residence, which is one of the remaining tax breaks for homeowners that's out there. That if you this is the tension in the housing debate, is that the people that are in the market, that's where most of their life savings exist, are in their home equity. So, most people aren't buying a house and selling it within 2 years, but some may have to, or they move, or they get a new job, and I understand maybe that's covered under the exceptions, but it makes me a little nervous that we're starting to go into that territory now. And so I don't think it's a huge public issue at this point, but it's just one thing. If that kind of broadened out in future years to like 5 years, or the tax got more severe, then yeah, it could.
That's interesting, because you're saying it's not going to age well, or it could not age well potentially.
Because I had governments behave. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I had the different reaction. Oh, sorry, I'll go to you, Geoff, real quickly, but I just because, you know, even the government's own projections have the real estate market heating up. And that's the type of context where actually it might age well. Sorry, Geoff.
Well, there's just not very many people who are actually flipping, and there's a lot of exemptions. You know, I think this is an important gesture to remind people about all the stuff that's happening on housing, but it's not that big a deal on its own. And you know, it's not like everybody who owns a house out there is hoping to get rid of it in the next 2 years. On the contrary, if they can afford it, they're going to hang on to it for dear life, I think, given the way interest rates have behaved. But another symbolic thing in the budget, and I say symbolic not because it's unimportant to those who used it, was the IVF break, because people who need IVF are really facing staggering costs. So the total cost of the budget, as I recall, I don't know, Mike, it was in the 40 millions, I think.
Yeah.
60,
yeah.
I think it
provide
was
this-
34
I think it was 34
for a couple
million.
of years. Yeah.
Yeah, which is it's not pocket money, but it's not huge by budget standards. But it speaks to a very wide audience of people, a lot of families, a lot of people who know people who've struggled with this. I think we've all met people who've struggled with conception issues like this. So it's a small item. And I would say, in contrast, the flipping tax is material and meaningful to people, because they think, okay, well, the government does care about those issues, and it's something that I care about too, although it may not be relevant for me today or anybody in my immediate family.
But but I think there's more similarity with the IVF promise, though, Geoff, and I was sort of reacting to it in light of, you know, the Trump promise for the federal ban on abortion. And I realize there's this, you know, like I'm not sort of trying to say that those policy debates leak over here, but it means women's reproductive rights are just going to be so salient, certainly in the lead up to November and the election in the States. So it feels to me like a good kind of like the way the flipping tax is about saying, you know, you care about housing. I feel like this IVF promise is a way of saying, like, yeah, you're not going to be trying to evacuate your embryos from the province because they're going to now be considered, it's going to be considered murder to thaw them. Like,
no, I agree. I think it was a good move, even though it was very expensive.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, that's a good example of, you know, it's almost like Harper-esque in a way, in terms of micro targeting a plank that a certain group of people will like. And Harper, you know, and his tax cuts would have, like, you know, a tiny little tax cut for someone to get sports equipment or something for this and something for that. And they were slicing and dicing the population up that way. Now, the IVF thing may be, you know, it's just the right thing to do, but a certain group of people will like it. But the engine underneath the budget to lift everybody up is what's not as apparent to me. And even some of their enthusiasms in the first year of the EB administration didn't seem to be reflected, like hydrogen. I did not see any reference to hydrogen in the budget at all. I did a word search and didn't find it. And that was a big feature in year one in terms of a vision. And they're still talking about it outside of that. But I'm thinking, like, okay, was that one up and now it's been taken off to moving on to different things, or I don't know. So I have trouble getting the consistent thread here.
The housing front has got a couple of elephants in the room that are just sacred cows that are just untouchable. And one
are they elephants or cows? Sorry.
Well, they're sacred elephants or cows, whatever. You can't eat. They're an elephant in the room and a sacred cow at the same time.
But
what if that elephant
I'm thinking of a homeowner grant,
which
is an enormous, enormous gift to people who don't need it. That is untouchable politically. And, you know, I think we're reaching the point, and this government's experiencing it, where I would say even a conservative government would have a hard time cutting as hard as they would like to get to zero. You know, the current room is just not there. If there's going to be a huge economic boom that produced a gusher of wealth, then maybe you could keep raising, you know, launching new programs and so on. But when you have a situation with compensation increases negotiated and interest rates rising and all of those pressures and a basic taboo on any kind of tax increase, then you've got a problem. And I think that's going to be a problem for any administration down the road.
Yeah, but I don't think it's as binary as just saying, you know, increase revenues and to create more programs, or cut spending and you lose programs. I mean, I just don't see, it's not apparent to me of a rigorous review to look at expenditures to see whether we can do things better, which has happened in the past. I mean, how hard are they negotiating the labor agreements? How are they
came to the brink of a strike, so that's pretty hard. I mean, I think it was the pattern that was set.
Well, it's a record number of public sector employees on the payroll now too. And it said in the budget, there's 520,000 employees in British Columbia that are funded by the provincial purse. 520,000, that's like over 10% of the population now. It's always been a big number. But, you know, in the budget, it said, you know, in terms of BC's job growth, it came from public, and we actually had private sector losses.
Well, and wouldn't we still
So-
be lagging other provinces in terms of like proportionally, like a per capita?
I don't know,
that?
but
Sure,
I guess the point I'm
everybody's-
just making is like, are we slowing the spending? Can we slow the spending and still get the same results?
Well, we'll find out, because this budget does not increase spending over the next 3 years
Yeah,
for most of the
yeah.
ministries. You know, that's one of the interesting contradictions of it. The people stare at the deficit and go, "Oh, they must be blowing their brains out." But actually, in many ministries, I think there's kind of some tight, you know, some lean days ahead. I'm all in favor of the efficiencies, by the way, and I think that would be a great thing to do. But I don't expect it to save $7 billion.
Okay, I want to move us on because we have a topic we have tried to get to a few weeks in a row that I really want to hold some time for. Mike, stop staring at me. Don't give me the evil eye. Calm down. It'll be okay. We'll give you more time. We'll give you more time.
Sorry, I was just reflecting how Geoff was sounding like me in 2016. Anyways,
That's awesome. All right, that was worth it. Okay, but let's take a minute and let's talk about Richmond. And I want to say, like, we tried to get this one and it moved pretty quickly from a place where council approved something like 7-2, this motion to go to VCH and just explore the possibility of a safe consumption site in Richmond, and then sort of moved really quickly to, I believe yesterday, Mayor Malcolm Brody actually said, okay, the issue's dead. There won't be a safe consumption site coming to Richmond anytime soon. Why was this a blink and you'll miss it kind of, why did this move so quickly, and why did it explode so quickly, Mike? Any sense of that?
well, I think there was a movement on some members of council, Cash Heat in particular, who wanted to take a look at this.
Former Solicitor General, former police inspector.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And, you know, he was, on the news, made his message very clear, like one death is too many. Now, I think what happened here is that they opened up that for public debate, and a significant group of residents, many from the Chinese community, came and voiced their very strong disapproval. But initially, council seemed to be weathering that storm, and the province came in and the health authority said, we don't need it here. End of story. And it struck me as odd because the supervised drug injection site issue is fraught with controversy and division. And it's usually been the NDP that have taken the
election year odd, maybe,
the
Mike?
the positive stance on it.
Yeah.
And here in Richmond, it got shut down pretty fast. Now, I know there's, the Vancouver Coastal Health came out and said they didn't need it there. And if I'm just speaking as a man on the street here, it's like, okay,
Mike
Richmond's
McDonald, man on the street.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
man of the
It's
people.
just the average Mike McDonald right now.
Go.
Not the political veteran.
Not the
Yeah,
superstar one we get.
Just
average.
little old me.
Little old you.
I mean, okay, somebody's gonna have to explain it to me because Richmond's over 200,000 people. It's a big city.
Yeah.
Vancouver's got a lot of these services. I mean, to me, it's like there's always been that tension. Like, what are the suburbs doing on this problem? Why is it always on the downtown east side to have all the services available to all the users that need it?
Yeah.
And that's what just my first instinct was that. And I'm thinking, like, good for Richmond Council for entertaining the discussion.
Yeah.
And frankly standing up to the mob that developed there initially, and there was all sorts of political commentary about it. But the provincial government was like, we're not. I mean, the MLA was one of the MLAs for the NDP was like front and center, like this is not a good idea. So I just thought it was a little off brand for the NDP.
Was it off
Well, I
brand?
don't think, I think based on my experience during the pandemic, it's very difficult to tell a medical health officer at Coastal Health or anywhere else what health services are needed or not needed if they have a particular view. So I assumed that this whole thing had started because the there was some desire somewhere in the health infrastructure to have such a site, but it appears to have originated in the mind of Kashid, and that's good because we need to have these discussions, as you say. But I just don't think I can't imagine a situation where you could phone up Patty Daly, who's the medical health officer in Vancouver, and say, we've got a political problem. We need you to shut down this thing, because she wouldn't do it unless she believed it was the right thing to do. So, I look at Richmond, and this was the case during the pandemic too. There was a much earlier take up of concern in Richmond about the virus because people were reading the news from China. There was a much higher adoption of masking early on when that was considered a bit offbeat, and then controversial later in the broader population. So there are specific circumstances, but it was an interesting reminder of how certain issues can just come right off the hook in some communities. And I'm sure, even though the council bravely voted in favor of a site,
voted in favor of exploring the possibility of a site.
Yeah, but they may have been relieved that it wasn't going to be forced through implementation, bylaw changes, and all that kind of stuff, because there was no real conversation happening. It wasn't clear. I didn't hear anybody speak in favor of it there except the council themselves, but I don't follow Richmond politics that closely.
Well, but leaving aside the, bureaucratic positions on things, what struck me also on this issue was that within 48 hours, the premier was speaking on this.
Mm-hmm.
And the premier injected himself, so to speak, into the debate. And I've seen this now a number of times with the premier, that he shuts things down quickly before they become problems. And we saw it last week on the Land Act, and we've seen it. I mean, it's not necessarily shutting down quickly. Sometimes he's just being decisive and changing course on things too, whether it's no fault insurance or the BC Housing Board. He's
decisive.
Well, yeah, or merciless, or whatever you want to call it. But I think that's an interesting leadership trait, and it's one that people can admire or be concerned about. But he's, he doesn't mess around once he's made his decision up on something. So I thought this Richmond thing was kind of interesting that way, and he was just like, forget it.
Yeah, it's the kind of trait. Yeah, go ahead.
He's super active in terms of doing events, and so he's available to the media more than would otherwise be the case.
That's a good point.
And if there's a hot issue that day, he will get it, and he's impatient with muddled answers, obviously.
Yeah.
So I think that one was already sorted, but he's out there a lot, and I can't imagine that there's any criticism in the press gallery, although there may be, that he's not available. He's really available, and there's an argument that he could leave some of this work to other people, but he wants to do it.
It feels like the type of trait, though, that really, really works until it doesn't. So we'll watch for that. But in the meantime, all this finally getting to that topic, let's reward ourselves and go grab a drink.
It was 11:52 p.m. on January 12th, 2024, when I arrived in Vancouver after a week of aloha. As I walked breezily out the arrivals door at YVR, a wall of frozen air punched me right in the face. Pro tip: check the forecast before you arrive from Hawaii in a t-shirt. While I was unprepared for this wintry cold blast, our sponsor, FortisBC, was working overtime to ensure BC residents were not left in the cold. On that day, FortisBC delivered twice the energy of BC's electricity system, and at 21,763 megawatts, showed us all how much we rely on diversified energy pathways. The thing is, gas customers like you and me have invested billions of dollars over the years into building the infrastructure that delivers gas to our homes and businesses across BC. That paid-for infrastructure allows gas to reach us reliably, safely, and affordably, like when that cold snap caused me to snap at YVR. Why did I leave my coat in my suitcase anyway? There'll be another January 12th, hopefully not too soon, and FortisBC will be there for us with a diversified approach that builds on the strengths of our gas and electricity delivery systems and helps us meet provincial emissions reduction targets towards a clean energy transition. Hotel Pacifico may be heated by its own hot air, but FortisBC is there when we need it. Energy for a better BC and a better podcast.
Let's raise a glass or take a shot. Time to raid the minibar.
I'm going to do a shot and a toast and a shout out today, which is something you get from the Hurly Burly, but people who listen to that
Hey, you.
or Sir Hayu, sorry,
Yeah, yeah.
Hayu, to anyway, I'm going to start with the toast, which is to a guy I count as a close friend, but he's MP Don Davies from Kingsway, who's been in the thick of this pharmacare discussion nationally for a long time, and I haven't been as enthusiastic about it as he would have liked me to be, but I think he's vindicated today as we see this announcement. And diabetic medication and contraceptives will be available on a single payer system. I think that's terrific work, and I congratulate him on that. I wish that I could raise a toast, but I'm going to take a shot at his colleague from Northern Ontario, Charlie Angus, who brought in a private member's bill, which purported to regulate, if it had ever passed, which it never would, advertising by fossil fuel companies, which so aggravated the NDP armed wings in Alberta and Saskatchewan that they're talking about breaking off ties with the federal party. So
Don't you
my
think
shot
it's
is at Charlie
long
Angus.
overdue for Rachel Notley? I know she's leaving, but isn't it long overdue for them to break ties? Like the federal NDP have done nothing to help them get elected. And
Well, we're just
Alberta and
doing
Saskatchewan.
shots and toasts right now, Mike. But that's a
Save
whole
that
show
one.
if you want to get into it. Anyway,
Well,
I just think what Don
I
Davies
like
did
interfering.
was useful, and what Charlie Angus did, triggering a discussion about dissent in the NDP around this issue right now, is not useful. And so my hey you is to Jagmeet Singh, who's another BC member of Parliament and also leader of the National NDP. Jagmeet, can we please have more Don Davies and less Charlie Angus? So that's it for today.
Fantastic.
Yeah, we'll have that chat another day then,
We
Geoff.
will on the Best Western episode. Is that Anita Zanker's little
Yeah, I mean
shout
it's
out?
it's a good question with BC NDP too. I don't
yeah.
think the federal
We no
NDP
longer have the
helps.
Liberals to kick around, so
let's do it. All right,
That's
we'll
true.
save that one. I'm going to raise my glass. I'm going to raise my glass to two women who I've known for a while, and I'm proud to know two of the most tireless advocates, I'm going to say, in this country, Lynelle Anderson and Sharon Gregson. I was thinking of them kind of in the wake of this budget. They're two childcare advocates who I want to say are really key in advocacy for childcare in BC, but also had a big influence on the federal program that came through. And they are people who've been advocating for years, going back to a time when you came up with a childcare ask to any premier in particular, but also federally. And you'd get some answer, particularly from political strategists, about how, well, men don't care about childcare, and the only women who do are the ones who have kids, and other women who don't have kids of that age don't care about other women. And it has been a slog. And this budget probably was I'm sure, was a disappointment. We're behind in BC on our targets. I think we've got 14,000 $10 days spaces. And the target for this year was more like 23,000. So my glass is raised to them because I know they'll keep going, and I know they'll be some of the strongest advocates for anything in this country. And if you are someone who cares at all about childcare, you should be grateful for those two women because they are excellent.
All right. Well, I'd like to raise a glass to a fallen friend, Patty Sahota, who was the much more than just the MLA for Burnaby Edmonds. She served one term from 2001 to 2005. She was elected at the age of 31 and was one of the youngest South Asian women ever elected to the BC legislature. And I think went into cabinet at age 34. She died suddenly. It was a shock to her friends and family. And there was a memorial on the weekend, which hundreds of people attended, and as a tribute to her memory and her people who remember her radiance and her wonderful laugh and her smile, and the many good work she did in her career outside of politics that she continued on well after leaving office. It was nice to see the Speaker Chauhan, there to provide his presence and connection to the legislature. It was also good to see former Premier Campbell speak and provide his remembrances of his caucus colleague. So my condolences to the Sahota family and all of Patty's friends, and she will be dearly missed. And she made her mark, and we wish we had more time with her, but she lived well for her 54 years. Thanks.
Thanks, Mike.
Thanks, Mike.
All right. Thanks, listeners. I'd also like to thank Bhupinder Hundal for joining us today. Thank you to TELUS and Fortis BC, our sponsors. We'll see you next week, guests. BC, you can never leave.
Checkout time at Hotel Pacifico. We hope you enjoyed your stay.